Good evening. Because I think this is a unique Kosovo story, I think we need to share it with the world, and I want to share it in English so that the world can learn from us. My story is about a brand of journalism in Kosovo that had to reinvent itself and go beyond bare reporting in order to have a real effect in exposing corruption in a country where corruption is often male, unaccountable, and often threatening. Today I will tell you how I founded a media initiative that started in 2005 with 3 people and has grown to become the biggest social media enterprise with 70 people producing 3 current affairs programs, online journalism media, a newspaper, and a social media platform which encourages the citizens to report corruption, as well as monitoring of courts, justice, and health and education institutions here in Kosovo. But before I go there, let me tell you how I got into journalism in the first place. My exposure to the power and vulnerability of journalism was in the context of vulnerability of journalism was in the context where I learned as in a repressive regime. Journalism in Milosevic's Yugoslavia was synonymous with state propaganda. Information was something to be bent according to the desires of the regime. I have to confess, however, that despite all the rampaging and the human rights violations and the massacres that were happening because of Milosevic in the 90s, I thought that the worst thing that this regime did was the decision to fire my mother. In my mind, though, I will tell you a bit about this firing of my mother because I learned to understand that it is this event that really shaped a lot of the things in my life and career afterwards. My late granddad, Mehmet Gjevori, had invested 4 decades of his teaching life to eliminate illiteracy among women, which was 95% in the post-Second World War here in Kosovo when he came to act as a teacher. As a result, my mom became one of the first generation of women who went to university, she got a job, and was contributing to the family household, just as my dad was. But Milosevic put a stop to this. In an effort to segregate the civil service, he fired Albanian civil servants, and as a result, my mom was among them. Milosevic made my mom a housewife. The bastard, I thought, at the very least. Decades of efforts to emancipate Kosovo, the most underdeveloped part of former Yugoslavia, went up in smoke, and our mothers became jobless, and their daughters, like myself, went through a segregated school system, through home parallel system of education that all Albanian children like myself had to go through, which kept us quite uneducated. Why is this important to the work I do now? It is because I feel since this moment, me and my mom have both been trying to compensate for the last decade, just not to accept that we have something lacking. In an attempt, it was all an attempt to live up to our own dreams no matter what. So when my mom got fired, she put herself and me through an English course because she said the Albanian, our native Albanian, and the Serbian we learned at school will not prepare us for a job market. Then, just in case school doesn't work out, because since she did university and still she was jobless, she said you have to pick up a trade. In case you are left without a job like me, without a university degree, at least you don't beg a man for money, she said. That's the most important thing. So it was up to me to choose a trade I pick, and I decided to take a sewing course. I know it's hard to imagine me as a seamstress. Yes, eventually I got bored of sewing and I wanted to become a reporter. I was convinced that to be a journalist, you must have this amazing thing I was hearing about called email. And I made it clear to the jobless woman that I need a computer. She thought about it and came back to me with a proposal. She was going to sell her wedding jewelry, the 5-carat golden necklace that my grandmother had bought her, if I agree never to tell my dad and family about it. The promise which expires now, this very moment, 20 years later. So, everything else that followed in my life, I think, was kind of a side effect to my mom making sure that at all costs I will make it in life. Eventually, the English course got me a job as a translator for the BBC, and I was able to learn the trade from the best correspondents whom I saw that risking your life is a normal part of a job if you want to perform a public service. They were here in the war zone in Kosovo, they were doing that, and it was all for public service, to inform. Working for the BBC, my job was largely to be in charge of contacts with the Kosovo Liberation Army, the guerrilla fighters who, after the war, would go to disarm themselves and become politicians. A fascinating transformation story to have witnessed and covered as a local journalist. Things will only start getting easier now after the war, I thought. In post-war Kosovo, our job as a journalist was to make these disarmed war leaders accountable to their citizens. Piece of cake compared to war. So I co-founded BIRN, a media NGO, and set up a watchdog current affairs program that employed Western-style journalism and was challenging inept governance. We called it simply Life in Kosovo. Many politicians thought this was megalomaniac because it was, my first name was Life, translated as Life, and the show was called that. The first year, the program saw quite a backlash as an older class of politicians simply could not handle the fact that this young woman was keeping, was simply holding their feet to fire on national TV. Who do you think you are? They said, and the predictions were that only after a few weeks our show is going to be off air. But our viewership skyrocketed. From a late night programming, we were put to a prime time because Kosovo audience was hungry for a show that challenged the ruling class, even if that meant standing, bearing through this arrogant young woman with glasses. The old saying goes that in a democracy, all politics is local. So we were the first media team to go to every single town in Kosovo and hold mayoral debates in the first elections where we chose our mayors directly. We went among that voter who was choosing that politician, and we filmed that promise, and later on we came back a year later and played that mayor that was elected. We played them the tape that they had promised and held them accountable to their own promise. But I had been anchoring these programs since 2007, and it was great, but something was missing. Can you see what's missing? All the politicians were men. How was I to engage the above 50% of electorate of Kosovo that were women, and in fact were just switching off these political debates because they weren't represented? This year, frustrated by that idea, we decided we're not going to ask the politicians to introduce themselves. We're going to ask their partners, wives, girlfriends to introduce themselves and ask the key questions which Kosovar audiences want to hear about from a politician. How wealthy they are, what car do they drive, how well they sleep at night. All of this because we live in a country where getting to power means empowering your pockets rather than empowering your voters or your people. So these were important. The women tuned in to watch in masses, and we had this year in December, from October, we've had the largest viewership since. I'm convinced that the work that my team did in the field, presenting candidates in a different light, offering the chance to the voters to see very detailed programs. For the first time in the Balkans, all the candidates who ran in the runoff presented with PowerPoint presentation against a real municipal budget. This was revolutionary in a place where everybody talked about only patriotism, nationalism, and independence, only 7 years ago. So I thought this, the contribution that we did was directly caused that the recent December 2013 election result, I think again to be the most interesting in the Balkans ever, because this electorate voted out 50% of the former mayors. They were voted out, and this is, for me, it's an incredible result, because we went from a country in 2010 known as a country that did industrial scale vote rigging to 2013 fair election that changed over 50% of its mayors. This was the first time for me for such a dramatic switch over of power without any backstage murders, without imprisonment, riots, or war. This, I believe, are the effects of what is invented here in Kosovo: engaged journalism. Journalism with the purpose that we are applying here. Civil society journalism, if you want to call it, we call it engaged journalism that goes beyond bare reporting. I am stating we are reinventing it because it is not enough to only report corruption or vote rigging in a place where institutions do nothing about it after you report it. If they don't do their job, maybe we have to reinvent the way we communicate and engage. Frustrated by the indifference and the impotence of local institutions to do something about matters that we report, we have established a legal media team that simply follows up on all our evidence that the journalists collect. They file it to the prosecution and push these cases beyond the reporting that most viewers see on screen. We have one case in the Constitutional Court, and the others are pending. Apart from this, our journalists have been trained to act as election monitors, and they do this voluntarily every election. And as a result of their election monitoring and complaints, 15 polling stations last time were annulled or renumbered because evidence of rigging and manipulation was found. Again, because they acted not only just as simple reporters, but engaged journalists. So, while my granddad's and mom's obsession was the kind of legacy they leave behind to me, to make me fit for survival in the world they thought is harsh if a woman doesn't get educated, I too am obsessed with the legacy that I leave for my daughters. In a world which faces different challenges to the one of a former century, it worries me that I have given birth to 2 kids in a place where, according to the World Bank, over 800 babies die in a year and over 100,000 people have respiratory diseases because of the polluted air, only because of a polluted air that comes largely from coal plants that are next 10 kilometers from my hometown, Pristina. This same World Bank that provided this data of the effects on the coal has on health is backing the construction of yet another lignite power plant, this locking Kosovo and my 2 daughters in a 40-year future with polluted air. This is the most polluted town in Europe. So, I don't want to just report about it. I am an engaged journalist on this and become a campaigner against this coal plant by going all the way to South Africa, where I got informed what happened with the last World Bank built coal plant there. And I also traveled to Washington to challenge the head of the World Bank about these short-sighted plans that they have in Kosovo. Some media have called me a badass mama about this. Some have criticized me for mixing my role as a journalist, as unbiased journalist, with the role of activist. But in my belief, a good journalist does not simply report what happens today. A good journalist fights for a better tomorrow. This soul is a part of what we mean by going beyond bare reporting, actually using our media to hold our leadership accountable, not just leadership, international organizations, international corporations, and shape public opinion about the kind of nation we want Kosovo to become. In closing, there are 3 lessons that I want to share with you in the world watching that come from this experience we've had in Kosovo. First lesson is clearly, listen to your mothers, but also not just listen to your mothers, make them partners. Today, my mom is a partner, and it takes the support of mothers and ideally of the entire society to have strong, inventive women. And beyond beyond mothers, please find supporting colleagues. I work with probably what is the best producer in the Balkans, Faik Ispahio. It is very important to find colleagues who share the same vision as you, as the attacks will happen when you least expect them. And it is not fun to face them along. My producer has been instrumental, particularly in 2009, supporting me through a 10-day campaign of public death threats, public death threats that were published in a government tabloid that labeled me and my team as traitors, Serbian spies. Life in Kosovo, according to this tabloid, had shortened my life. My producer was continuously had my back in what is often a threatening political scene, encouraging me, strategizing with me, and emboldening me for a long fight. Second lesson I want to share with you tonight is that freedom of speech is not cheap. So don't waste time, fundraise. Literally, there's going to be a financial retaliation if you are going to challenge corrupt elites. Your main job as an independent journalist is to monitor and challenge the ruling class, but to do so independently, you must have your own financial independence. All I did in the first 2 years after the war was fundraise for my TV program, after which I got enough funds to hire an entire crew of 3 people. But today, 7 years on, Life in Kosovo is an institution of over 70 staff, independently financed by local and international donors. This financial independence allows us to professionally report on issues of day-to-day governance. Final lesson, make allies. Local and international allies help. When guerrilla fighters turned politicians threatened my life, a local head prosecutor confessed to me that he was too afraid to do something about it. Instead, I found the strongest allies in local but also international organizations. Over 50 local and international organizations made so much pressure to this government over the threats to me and my team that they turned this issue an international embarrassment for the government, forcing the Prime Minister to ask the newspaper to stop the lynching campaign against me.